From the 22 News Plus studio, this is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I am excited today because I have a professor of economics from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and we're talking about a lot of things today that will be affecting your pocketbook. Across the desk from me is Gerald Epstein. As I mentioned, he is from the University of Massachusetts, professor in the economics department. Professor Epstein, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
There are a slew of things we can talk about.
Lots going on.
But time limits us to a half an hour today. Probably, and I picked a few of the key hot buttons that I think most people are talking about because of what we hear in the mass media. Right. The number one thing is probably inflation. Explain to me where inflation comes from, how it's calculated.
Right. So inflation really refers to the cost of living, and it's the rate of change of the cost of living. It's how much prices are going up and at what rate. The price level is the current cost. And so people are concerned both about what things cost now, and they're concerned about how much they're going to go up over the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is now shut down because of the government shutdown, goes out and collects data on prices that the typical consumer has to pay in many parts of the country and calculates the price level and then the rate of change.
And then the data that they collect is across everything that affects you and my life. You know, it's our utilities, our groceries, gas prices, whatever it might be.
That's right. And then they have to weight them by what's in a typical consumer's basket. And that's a little tricky because different types of consumers spend a larger proportion or less proportion of their income on different wages. So elderly might pay a particularly high proportion on care, medical care.
Makes sense.
Whereas
then you and I might.
Yeah. So there's different price adjustments for different age groups and different demographic groups.
So currently, as we stand here in November 2025, the inflation rate is give or take 3%.
Right.
Where is that number compared to 6 months ago, a year ago, 10 years ago?
Right. So it's relatively low. Typically, in the last several years, it's been around 2.5%, 3%. The Federal Reserve's target is 2%.
Okay.
But right after COVID, with all the shocks from the supply side, the supply chains and so forth in COVID, it went up to over 7%. So it's come down substantially. It came down during the Biden administration, and it's remained roughly around the same since Trump took over.
So it's pretty consistent that somewhere between 2.5% to 4%.
Yes.
Is pretty consistent over time.
But in the 60s and 70s, when I was younger, it was higher. It was 6%, 7%, 8%.
But back then, that was considered normal?
Well, it was not considered as much of a crisis as it would seem today because people just aren't used to it.
Okay.
So they're more used to the 2.5%, 3% level now.
I remember when we came out, or during COVID, and just on the back end of it, manufacturers having a difficult time getting things for them to create their products. So that it costs them more, so it costs us, the consumer, more. Is that what drives inflation? So when it costs us, the consumer, more, the inflation number, 3%, 4%, 8%, that's where that number comes from?
Yes, though we economists always joke that everything comes down to supply and demand.
Okay.
So you were focusing on the supply side, what things cost. And during the COVID, there were these real disruptions of the supply chain. You just could not get certain things,
right.
Remember. But the demand is also important. If there's a big demand relative to the supply, that will tend to put upward pressure on prices. So right now we have both things going on. That is, there still are supply problems, partly related to tariff costs, cutback on immigration, which is reducing the supply of labor to certain industries and so forth. And we have a quite high demand, particularly among richer people, wealthier people who've seen their stock prices go up so much, and that gives them a lot of spending power.
So I know you have explained this before. So tariffs are really a fee that our country is putting on manufacturers from other countries. correct?
Right. So it's a tax on imports from other countries, and it's paid by the importer, the company that's importing it in the first instance. And what usually happens is they tend to pass those on to the ultimate consumer. So it goes through this kind of chain, but it's it's importers, that is the Americans, who pay the tariff. Occasionally, the foreign seller might reduce their price a little bit just to try to keep competitive, but it's never 100%. So there's always some increase in the cost to Americans.
So if the cost really comes down to the consumer paying for that tariff, recently President Trump announced he was giving, I guess, awarding U.S. citizens several $1,000s that the government has gained in tariff money. How does that happen?
Well, there's a question of whether he really has the authority to do that. But putting that aside, he said he was going to give $2,000 to every American as a payback for the tariff revenue that was generated. But the problem is there's only about $230 billion that has been generated. And if he actually did give back $2,000 to every American, that would be more like $530 billion. So it's way more.
The math doesn't add up.
The math doesn't add up.
Okay. But didn't we as the consumer, when we bought that item, we paid that tariff?
That's right.
But not to the U.S. government, but to the provider, right?
So what happens is the first person who imports it, the first company that imports it, pays the tariff to the government.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then the question is, how much of that do they pass on to the ultimate consumer? And this time around, since President Trump has implemented this policy, a lot of the companies have not passed on a full 100%. So they've reduced their profits or their revenues, but some of that has gotten passed on. So it's been the companies that import it, and the consumers are the ones who have been paying it.
Wow. We have a lot more to go, folks, so stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back, everyone, to this edition of In Focus. Across the desk from me is Professor Gerald Epstein from the University of Massachusetts. He's an economics professor. In the first part, we talked about inflation and tariffs and how it affects your and my pocketbook on everyday items that we're buying. Think about bananas, in January. They don't come from the United States. They come from outside the United States. So those bananas are going to go up. And
that's right.
Or utility prices are going up. That begs the question about employment.
Right.
So I know employment unemployment is relatively low right now, but it's sort of a disguised number because there are elements of the employed group that are doing fine, but the younger group that you deal with at the university level, they're graduating college, they're having a very difficult time finding jobs. So that just between the inflation, the tariffs, and the unemployment of the younger kids, they're really being stressed.
It is stressful for them. And even though the unemployment rate right now is relatively low, it's around 4.4%, something like that, by historical standards. The problem is there aren't a lot of new jobs being created. And so there's kind of this equilibrium where there aren't a lot of new jobs being created, but there are relatively fewer people entering the labor market, partly because of the deportation of a lot of immigrants. That's having an impact as well. But there are very few new jobs being created. So college students are having a hard time when they graduate getting a job because there aren't a lot of new jobs being created.
But we hear nationally that they're always, I guess, President Trump had said, was it October or September, record number of new jobs created, but you seem to contradict that.
No, it's not really the case. There haven't been a record number of new jobs created. There's been relatively few new jobs, and so that the unemployment rate is remaining low, but the younger people who are just entering the labor market are having real trouble.
So when it comes to wages, actually, let me stick with the younger generation for a moment. So no new jobs being created,
Relatively few. Yeah.
But Is it our generation that's not retiring as our parents may have done at a certain age? We're working longer, so those jobs for the younger generation coming up aren't there. How are the recent college graduates not working?
Part of it is first of all, let me say that we don't have really good statistics about the moment partly because of the government shutdown.
Okay.
So it's a little patchy, but the problem is that the economy is not growing very fast. The economy is softening, and that's partly because of so much uncertainty with government shutdown and tariffs and not knowing what's happening. So the economy is kind of softening, so it's not growing very rapidly. It might even be kind of stumbling into recession territory, though we don't know.
I have heard that.
So that creates a soft labor market, not many new jobs being created. And because of all the uncertainty, I think it's right. People are reluctant to retire because they don't know what's going to be happening in the future. And then there's automation. I think we've talked a bit about people are talking about AI as reducing the demand for some entry level jobs, and that might be having an impact too. But that is so new, and it's hard to get statistics with all the chaos happening that we don't really know how big that impact is. But there are some estimates that impact is quite high.
You know, it's interesting. I'll pull up a stat now. I saw from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics that so far in 2025 year-to-date job cuts, the first 8 months of the year, according to the Department of Labor and Statistics, saw about 2% of job cuts were related to artificial intelligence taking those jobs.
Yeah.
But September was nearly 13%. And the description behind it was that AI takes the simplest, is doing the simple jobs, automating simple entry-level jobs, which sort of comes back to our conversation about those college graduates.
Right.
They graduate and they take the entry-level job, which really is starting to decline because of automation.
Right. And so if you think about job ladders, people entering at the bottom rung and then being able to move up, if the bottom rungs are gone, it does make it more difficult for the younger people to get in. Now, if the economy were really growing robustly, that could compensate for that problem. But we have the double whammy of a stagnating economy or maybe even shrinking economy and some of those entry-level rungs being taken out. It's really making it tough for younger people.
So when we look at earnings, I want to come back to my earnings. Are people earning more money overall? I mean, I think of my role here at 22 News, I get my annual 2% raise or whatever it is. Is that normal? Are people making more money than they have over the course of the last few years?
No, not really. The economists distinguish between what we call nominal wages, that is what you see in your paycheck, and real wages, that is what you see in your paycheck, and then adjust for inflation, that is how much of price has gone up. So what can it really buy you? And what we've seen in recent years is that real wages, which is what counts, have not been going up very much. And the latest statistics I've seen for the last year or so is that for the typical worker, the real wages are pretty stagnant also. If you look,
real wages
meaning what you get in your paycheck, and then adjusting that or lowering that for what the price increases have been. So the real buying power of your wages have not been going up very much. But we are seeing what some economists are calling the K economy. That is, if you think about the top part of the K and then above,
right, the arms of the K, yeah,
it goes like this, up and down.
Right.
That the wealthier people are doing quite well because of the big increase in stock prices. We have a big stock price boom. But the rest of the people who get most of their income from earnings are just staying about the same.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because reading some articles about budgeting and the American saving for retirement, 46%, 45% of United States Americans don't have a retirement account, don't have retirement savings. So that means 54% who do are maybe capitalizing on either a pension or a 401k, which is they're doing great, but you still have mid 40% of the American population doesn't have a retirement account.
That's right. And that's another reason why people feel like they have to work longer because they can't afford to retire.
That is frightening. We are up on our second commercial break. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back, everyone, to this edition of In Focus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. We're here in the 22 News Plus studios. Across the desk from me today is Professor Gerald Epstein. He is a professor of economics up at UMass. He is also the co-director of the Political Economy Research Institute. Professor, thank you so very much for joining me today. As I mentioned at the very start of this, you and I could talk for probably hours on the economy.
Yeah.
We've covered really some of the hot buttons: inflation, tariffs, unemployment. What are some of the other economic things that people need to think about and keep top of mind? We just had some elections at the beginning of November. Nothing really major, earth-shattering took place. Then a year from now, we will have the midterm elections, which could be a very interesting time when it comes to our economy and our investments and our markets.
So I think that if we're thinking about people being able to afford their living,
right?
So the affordability has become a really big issue. And if you think about the big expenses that most people have, it comes down to housing, it comes down to childcare, and medical bills.
Right.
And then you hope you have something left over to pay
to eat
and to go on maybe a vacation now and again. So I think this affordability issue is really what's going to be important driving the election. And we saw this with the election in New York, where Mamdani's main approach was affordability.
Right.
People can argue with the solutions he came up with, but he hit on that. And I think that really resonated with people. So I think that's something that people are going to be really looking at. And
but affordability is an individual word, quite frankly. You know, what's affordable to you or I might not be affordable to someone else. But the thing with Mamdani is, and anybody, and even Governor Healy is talking about, tax cuts or whatever. But I look at it as, Mamdani, just for example, he wants to make public transportation free. Well, public transportation costs money.
Yeah.
So if you're eliminating your subway fares and your bus fares and your train fares, where's that money coming from to pay for those resources?
That's right. So at the state and local level, that's a real issue because cities like New York, like New York City and the state of New York, or here in Springfield or in the state of Massachusetts, they can't run large deficits.
Right.
They have balanced budget requirements
by law.
By law in almost every state. And so that really means, yes, this has to get paid for somehow. At the federal level, though, it seems the government can run a huge deficit. And that's what our government is doing now, trillions of dollars. And so it doesn't seem to bite as much. But going back to your question, the question is how to raise tax revenue in order to pay for this. And is the tax system fair, and who pays really their fair share of taxes? So some who argue for more services like free buses, cheaper, more subsidized healthcare, say, well, we need a fairer tax system. So
right.
the people who have much more wealth need to pay the same share in income taxes as the secretary or the clerk.
And I don't know if you can answer this question, but if memory serves me correct, the tax burden on the U.S. population has changed over decades. There was the more wealthy people at one point in time paid more taxes, but now it's more even. I think the wealthy and the non-wealthy, for lack of a better description, pay the same percentage of taxes. Correct?
Well, overall, that's right. So you have a number of examples where very wealthy people pay almost no taxes because of all of the ways they can hide their wealth and their income. But yeah, we used to have what's called a progressive tax system, where the higher your income, the higher percentage of your income you paid in taxes. And amazingly, in the 1950s, right after the Second World War, the richest people, when they got an additional dollar, they would pay 60 or 70 cents on that dollar.
Wow.
And
but tax laws have changed so
tax
that
laws have changed
they're able to
dramatically.
hide all that.
Well, there's several things. One is the actual rates have come down, the legal rates, and then there are all these ways in which people can hide their wealth and avoid paying taxes. So I think many Americans feel like the tax system isn't necessarily fair anymore.
I agree with that.
And so that one of the ways to pay for cheaper transportation or subsidized healthcare is to make the tax system fairer. And so one idea for doing that is to put on a wealth tax, a small wealth tax, 1% of wealth and so forth. So those who have a lot of wealth can pay more taxes. You say if you have more than $1 or $5 million in wealth, maybe you pay 1%.
But doesn't that just encourage the wealthy to become more creative with their income? So, for example, I have heard Elon Musk. His income is virtually non-existent, his personal income. So he doesn't pay a lot of taxes. Or Jeff Bezos. I think Jeff Bezos takes $100,000 a year, which is one of the richest men in the world. But his annual earnings aren't much because he finds the tax loopholes. So it won't really affect the wealthy.
Well, you're right. There's always going to be ways in which the wealthy are going to try to get out of paying. And they're going to pay a lot of money to tax accountants and lawyers and so forth to help them do that. The counter to that, though, is to invest a lot of money in tax enforcement, the IRS.
Right.
Build up the IRS, give them the tools they need to enforce the taxes.
But
the government has done the opposite.
They're trying to eliminate the IRS.
Exactly.
And that would benefit the wealthy.
Overall, yes, that's correct. So I think we're moving in the wrong direction. And I think the solution to this, to be able to pay for more things that people need to help subsidize childcare or medical care, we have to really create a fair tax system.
So my feeling is that we really need to look at how government runs as a whole, from taxes to, you name it, healthcare to childcare, everything, and really start from scratch. But I don't think that'll ever happen.
It's going to take, I don't think you can start from scratch. I think you have to have some important interventions that will move the economy and the tax system into a better direction. If you can't start from scratch because it'll disrupt everything.
Right.
So
right.
More incremental changes, I think, is what we need. But I think the current administration is trying to completely revamp the economy in a way that's going to benefit probably more of the wealthy people at the expense of most other people. So they're not doing it from scratch. They are trying to do it from scratch, but in a different direction.
Professor Jerry Epstein, I can't thank you enough for giving me some of your time today. A fascinating conversation. Hopefully you'll come back and join me again sometime.
I'd love that.
Thank you so much.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.